very good morning to you. There are warnings that some NHS trusts in England could take up to 5 years to clear the backlog caused by the pandemic. NHS providers say the number of postponed operations is the highest it's seen since the beginning of the century, and they're warning of similar delays in a range of services. Let's talk to our correspondent Ashna Huranak, who's in the newsroom with all the details. And who is likely to be most affected by this, Ashna?
We know at the heart of this, Stephen, there are going to be many patients, millions of them, in fact, we know, are waiting when it comes to facing some sort of hospital treatment. Whilst it does say, NHS providers, the urgent care they are tackling very quickly, hospitals in England, that is, they are still facing huge backlogs when it comes to a variety of services. Let's take you through who exactly is affected by this. The first one, they say, is cancer care. Those are some of the services which are impacted, not necessarily referrals, but those waiting to start treatment. The other one is elective surgery, things like hip and knee replacements, spinal surgery, nose and throat procedures too. But there are also concerns about other areas, less visible backlogs in mental health and community services. The NHS providers organisations say they've heard from trusts that have told them it could take them some 3 to 5 years to try and clear this backlog. The detail in this is new, but we had reported on Friday that there are 4.7 million people in England waiting to start some form of hospital treatment. That figure is accurate up until the end of February. I also spoke on Friday to one of the 387,000 people who've been waiting over a year to have a routine procedure. This particular woman I spoke to was waiting to have spinal surgery, and we were told on Friday that this could be a multi-year challenge. They have suggested some solutions, though. If I take you through some of them, the NHS providers have said. The first one is increasing capacity, increasing the size of the workforce. We know that the NHS as a whole has been quite overstretched, particularly in the last year. We've seen that full frontal, really. The restructuring of hospitals is the other one, so they're better prepared to deal with further COVID waves and annual winter struggles. It's particularly a difficult time for them, we know. The other one is improving efficiency, with trusts working together more cohesively. We heard on Friday that NHS England acknowledged that they have had 400,000 COVID-19 patients over the past year. It's no wonder that has had an impact on services. But they do say that in January and February, which was their busiest months throughout the whole of the pandemic, they still managed to undertake some 2 million routine procedures. In the last few moments, we have heard, Stephen, from the Department of Health, and they have told us that we are backing the NHS with an extra £7 billion, they say, for health and care services. That includes, of course, a COVID-19 recovery fund. That will cost them £1 billion to help the NHS try and recover from the brutal year that we've had.
OK, Ashna, thank you. Well, let's talk to the Chief Executive of NHS Providers, Chris Hobson. Good to see you this morning. This £7 billion of, we presume, extra funding coming from the government. What difference is that going to make to try and resolve this issue?
Well, Stephen, when we talk about NHS funding, it's easy to kind of confuse different bits. So that is the extra money that the NHS is getting this year to meet COVID costs, which is very welcome, but that's a completely different issue to the multi-year costs. In other words, the cost next year, the year after and the year after that we're going to need to meet and clear this backlog. So it's important to just say that this isn't just about money. It's actually about the NHS is going to need to transform the way it provides care, because we are going to have very, very big backlog here. I mean, our trusts have been looking over the last month about how that backlog, big that backlog will be. We still don't know the actual size yet, because there were a bunch of patients who we would have expected to be referred over the last 12 months who haven't been referred because of COVID. So we still don't know the full size of the problem. But what's becoming clear in the work our trusts have done over the last month is that we have got a really big backlog here. So what we're going to need to do is create a plan between ourselves and the government, with us working out how we're going to transform care and speed up getting through that backlog, and the government putting in extra funding.
I mean, it's interesting to be in a situation where we have such a big backlog without anyone pointing the finger of blame, because it's just, you know, what has happened after the terrible year that we've had. Because no one is blaming anybody for this, does that mean it gives you a slightly sort of wider remit to look at how you tackle this issue?
Well, I think there's two things to say. The first is that we must never forget the patient. And it was good to hear your colleague refer to a patient story, somebody she'd been speaking to. And certainly whenever I talk to our trust leaders, what they're really clear about is that one person having to wait any longer than they need to is a problem. And they're really, really committed to making sure that we get through this backlog as quickly as possible. But yes, you're right. I think it's really important that we understand that, we've got a backlog, not because the NHS hasn't been doing its job. It's actually been doing its job extremely well. We actually recovered services last autumn much quicker, actually, than we were expecting. But because of COVID, and we've had this disruption, and as soon as you get more COVID, every single one of our trust leaders says, look, the only way we can cope with this is, for example, turning operating theatres into temporary, COVID areas where we can treat the sickest patients. So as soon as you get COVID, the reality is you have to cut back on the amount of, for example, elective surgery that you're doing. So yes, I think the real opportunity here is, and I think you put it really well in your question, Stephen, is that we do have an opportunity here to do things differently. And you'll remember that over particularly in the early 2000s, we had a similar problem, and the way we tackled it then was effectively we did lots of overtime, we used the private sector, we had a kind of ruthless focus on cutting waiting lists. And the reality, I'm afraid, is that we've got many more priorities now. We absolutely have to deliver the long-term plan, NHS long-term plan. We've got to work out how we live long-term with COVID. So we haven't just got a small number of priorities. We've got a much larger number of priorities. Yeah. And the real issue is that actually we're going to have to do things differently. If we just try and do it the same way we did it back in the early 2000s, we're not going to get through this quick enough.
We do know, though, that every time there's any sort of attempted restructuring of the NHS, it hits an awful lot of opposition. Now, I guess the difference with this case would be normally it's coming from it's coming top down from the government saying things need to be changed. I mean, this is coming from you and proposing it to the government. Does that mean there is going to be more of a willingness amongst trusts and staff to do things differently?
Yeah, I think there's a real recognition that we do need to do things differently. And hey, Stephen, one of the great things that I think we've all learned over the last 12 months, and it's one of our big learning points of COVID, is that actually the NHS can transform much more quickly and much more effectively than we might previously have believed. So, you and I have spoken on at least a couple of occasions about the fantastic success of the vaccination campaign. We've had to completely reconfigure ourselves to deliver that vaccination campaign. Back last March, this time last year, we actually produced 30,000 beds for COVID patients. Luckily, they weren't all needed. But, that again, we demonstrated that we can transform at pace. So the deal here is, and there does need to be a really clear deal, which is we need to step up to the plate in the NHS in terms of transforming the way that we do things. But the government's got to provide the extra funding. And I'm afraid what's currently available won't be sufficient. Yes, they have given us that extra billion that the department was talking about, that your colleague was talking about earlier. But that's only for this year, and it's only the first instalment of the extra funding that's going to be needed here. So that's what we've got to do over the next few months, is work together on what's the plan to tackle this.
But, just briefly, Chris, I mean, the problem that you've got is with a backlog of, say, 5 million, as to sort of round it up, if the pandemic situation stopped today, you've got an absolutely exhausted workforce and now this huge backlog to deal with as well. I mean, how do you deal with all of this and take care of the welfare of your teams?
Well, that's exactly the challenge that our trust leaders are working through at the moment. They're really identifying exactly how they can make both those things work at once. Because the reality is that you can't recover a backlog if you haven't got the staff available to provide the care. So that's exactly what we're trying to do: is ensure that our staff have the space to decompress and have a bit of recovery. But then at the same time, what we're doing at the moment is getting through the most urgent cases. But having the right workforce model to get through all of this backlog is going to be fundamental.
Chris Hobson, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Good to talk to you, Stephen. Thank you.
Now, well, after a year of coronavirus restrictions, crowds will return to football stadiums today. Wembley is the first, with a small number of fans at the FA Cup semi-final between Leicester and Southampton. 4,000 people in attendance. Tickets limited to local residents and key workers. Now, it's one of the government's pilot events, which started with the World Snooker Championships in Sheffield. Our music fans in Liverpool will be allowed into a near-normal gig next month. 5,000 people attending a concert in Sefton Park. There will be no social distancing and no face coverings. But those who attend will have to provide a negative test in advance. The US climate change envoys told Sky News that global warming is now beyond catastrophic. John Kerry was speaking in China after the United States and China agreed stronger rules to combat the problem and saying they should be introduced before the end of the year. Mr. Kerry told Sophie Ridge world leaders must act now.
Well, it's extremely urgent. I mean, the word urgent is totally applicable to the current crisis that we're in because countries are simply not getting the job done. Even if we did everything that we set out to do in the Paris Agreement, the Earth's temperature is going to increase a very significant amount, perhaps as much as 3.7 degrees or more. And the reason for the real urgency now is that because we're not getting done what we said we'd do in Paris, it's actually heading towards 4 degrees or more. That's beyond catastrophic in the consequences to food production, water, habitability in various parts of the planet, the melting of ice, the sea level rise, the warming, all the consequences. So we have an opportunity to get on track. The United States has a summit next week. President Biden is hosting, and we will be setting forth our plan to try to do our part. And we hope to raise ambition among all nations over the course of these next months.
And just to remind you about the Daily Climate Show, back tomorrow, 6:30 and 9:30. Now, people around the world have taken part in services for the Duke of Edinburgh. He was buried during a ceremony at Windsor Castle yesterday, and while the numbers allowed to attend in person were small, the service was shown around the world. Caterina Vitozzi reports.
For all the pomp and the pageantry, this felt personal. Touches of the Duke everywhere. For those watching at home, these were the first glimpses of the Queen since Prince Philip's death. Entering St George's Chapel, a solitary figure. Inside, distance from her family and masked. However public a figure, this was still a private service in pandemic times.
Outside of the castle walls there was admittedly little to see, but the people who were here could hear the music and the cannon fire, and they took part in a minute of silence that, despite all the restrictions, still felt deeply moving.
I feel like it's the right thing to have done, for people to be able to come up and just be all together, really, because it's a shame we can't all be together inside and as one, as England always do.
It was, of course, not just England where this moment was marked. A life come full circle, celebrated, mourned, and remembered. Caterina Vitozzi, Sky News.
Well, also in the headlines this morning, police in the Czech Republic say they want to question 2 Russian men suspected of carrying out the poisoning of Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. They're wanted in connection with an explosion at an arms depot in 2014. Police say the men were in the country at the time of the attack, in which 2 people died. The Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is said to be on the verge of death as he continues his hunger strike in prison. Doctors say the politician is at high risk of a heart attack after being refused medical treatment and turning to starvation in protest. Now, just to warn you, you might find these images a little bit distressing. Safety regulators in the United States have released footage of a child being dragged under a treadmill and warned customers to stop using certain machines. Now, the pictures from the US Consumer Product Safety Commission show the youngster falling under the Peloton Tread Plus machine. He survived, but officials say another child has died in an incident with the same machine. Peloton insists the warning is inaccurate and misleading. Now, something that hopefully will put a smile on your face this morning. We'll show you Dexter. Oh, bless him. Dexter has learnt to walk again after suffering some severe injuries. As a puppy, he was hit by a car and badly injured his 2 front legs. Oh, God love him. Now, 5 years later, and after a few operations, he's adapted and now goes out for regular walks with his owner in Colorado, where he is a bit of a local celebrity. Oh, look at that. Look at that. God love him. How he manages, I mean, that's quite impressive. That is quite impressive. Bless him.
Reminds me of you in the mornings when you come in.
I'm not that steady.
No, that's true, actually.
Not till I've had a coffee, anyway.
After a coffee.
What's happening this morning, Naz?
A little bit of everything. Lots of sunshine out there this morning. Again, a chilly start, but some areas seeing some rain today.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. For the vast majority, again today, it is going to be largely fine and dry with lots of sunshine and actually feeling quite warm in the sunshine too compared to the cooler conditions that we've experienced earlier in the week. But there is also going to be some rain around for today, which is probably good news. Not too much rain, but we haven't really seen much of it at all this month. We are well below average for what we would expect for this time of year. So at the moment, cloudy with rain across Ireland, Northern Ireland, Western Scotland. Elsewhere, mainly dry and sunny, but chilly. Continuing that way into this afternoon. Lots of sunshine for Wales, England, the south and east of Scotland, feeling warm in the sunshine too, but cloudier out towards western areas later, turning the sunshine hazy. Staying cloudy with patchy rain for Ireland, Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, quite breezy over these areas too.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A doctor from Syria who's treating COVID patients in England has warned the NHS is facing a mental health pandemic amongst its staff. Dr Mohammed Kajouj has been talking to our reporter, Sadia Chowdhury.
Aleppo, a city ravaged by years of war and one of the hardest places in the world to be a medic. And it's here, at the Dara Shifa Hospital, that Mohammed Kajouj trained to become a doctor. Today he's fighting another kind of battle against COVID-19 in a hospital in York. He's done this for months and he's exhausted. Everyone here is.
I will always remember the first COVID patient I saw in emergency department. You can't just forget someone who repeatedly saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe."
He's a doctor who knows about losing the fight for life.
I've worked in a hospital that could be bombed and attacked at any moment.
He's experienced appalling pain and agony. He's experienced loss.
When the hospital was attacked severely and completely destroyed, we couldn't get anyone alive. All of them were dead, more than 30 people. I realized my best friend died.
The hardest part of the job, whichever front line he's on, is always the same.
To prioritize patients and decide to leave whoever you think you can't do anything for them because their injuries are just like too complicated, and you don't think they will make it no matter what you do for them.
Today, there are rising concerns of post-traumatic stress disorder amongst NHS staff and calls for an urgent plan to address mental health issues, which experts say could last years after the immediate threat of the virus has gone.
Most people will remember COVID as a lockdown and not being able to function as normal. But for healthcare workers, it's a completely different matter. They will carry on having memories of patients they couldn't help. They could see them dying in front of their eyes, not being able to do anything.
Like many on the front line, Dr. Kajouj tries to find peace and calm away from the constant pressure of the emergency rooms. It doesn't last for long in this crisis, but he knows about pressure, and the lessons he learnt in Syria are now part of Britain's fight against COVID-19. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News in York.
Well, these are the latest coronavirus figures from the Department of Health, and 2,206 new cases have been reported, along with 35 more deaths. Now, that brings the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 127,260. Another 119,306 had their first vaccine and 485,421 had their second. That means 42 million injections have now been given out across the UK. Now, after a year of coronavirus restrictions, crowds return to the football today. Wembley is first, with a small number of fans at the FA Cup semi-final between Leicester and Southampton. 4,000 people there, with tickets limited to local residents and key workers. It's one of the government's pilot events. That started with the World Snooker Championship in Sheffield. And music fans in Liverpool will be allowed into a near-normal gig next month. 5,000 people attending a concert in Sefton Park. There will be no social distancing and no face coverings. How weird is that going to feel? But ticket holders will have to provide a negative test in advance. Now, the struggles of homeless people have been heightened by the pandemic, with government schemes and charities trying to help those in need. One volunteer group in Salford are putting themselves in the shoes of people they support by sleeping rough for 48 hours. Well, we're joined by the co-founder of Two Brews, Pete Locke. Good morning to you. What difference does it make for volunteers to put themselves through this?
Morning. Yeah, we decided to do this, one, to raise money and raise awareness, but to also see it through their eyes and try to experience what they go through on a day-to-day basis. And it's been pretty tough, I'm not going to lie. It's been an eye-opening experience.
Which is, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that, something which is, an experience and, and pretty tough for you is something that people have to go through every night of the week. It does put it all into some sort of perspective, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I mean, we've been fairly fortunate. The weather's been really nice the last couple of days. But on a day-to-day basis, it must be so hard for them. I mean, Manchester's alive all the time, 24 hours a day. There's people passing through and disturbing you. So I don't know how they sleep, to be honest. We've not had much sleep, and we've had it quite mild.
What do you think is happening in terms of the homeless situation in a city like Manchester? So much was done to try to get people off the streets during the pandemic. Are those efforts waning now, do you think?
Yeah, not enough, to be honest. It's frightening. We're getting more and more new faces. We send an outreach team out every single night with about 100 meals, hot drinks, and we're getting more and more new faces all the time. There does need to be more action put into place, more support networks to help them, because it's a growing issue.
Well, I mean, who are the people that you've been seeing over the last few weeks or so when you've been out and about? Who are the people who are sleeping homeless? Because I do think we have a misconception about who these people are and what their backgrounds are, don't we?
Yeah, a mixed bag of everybody, to be honest. A lot of people are finding themselves on the streets now, though, because of the pandemic. They might have lost a job. just different situations. You come across people from all different walks of life. It's not people stereotype homelessness. Anybody is a couple of missed pay packets away from ending up in this situation. So that's why we formed, and that's what we're trying to combat and make people aware of.
So in terms of the fundraising that you no doubt do all the time, but with this particular 48 hours, what are you going to do with that? I mean, is it a case of providing direct support to these people?
So it's going to be spent on ongoing costs, to be honest. I mean, like I say, making about 100 meals a night. We support them by sleeping bags, clothes, tents. But we also try and help signpost and get them the support that they need to actually get them off the streets. It isn't just about feeding them. It's about trying to get them, let's say, in a better place.
How difficult is it to provide people just with enough of a stepping stone to get off the streets and to get back into accommodation and start to build a life back up again?
It's really, really difficult, to be honest. It goes on what borough. So depending on what borough you're in, so people come into the city centre to be fed, but they might not necessarily be from the city centre. They might be from the outer regions. And I think what needs to happen is the people need to get the support all under one umbrella so that they can be signposted to the right places rather than being passed from pillar to post.
Well, look, Pete, good luck with the rest of it, and thank you for talking to us and again raising awareness of this issue, which is too easily forgotten amongst a lot of us. So it's good to talk to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time.
OK, let's get a check on the weather for you with Naz.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. It's looking fine for many areas once again today. We've got high pressure keeping hold of that settled weather, but there is going to be a bit of rain. But actually, it's much needed because so far this month we are well below average in terms of rainfall totals across the UK for the time of year. So currently patchy rain, cloudy skies and rather breezy over Ireland, Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, but it's not so cold across these areas thanks to the cloud cover in comparison to Wales, England, eastern parts of Scotland where it's chilly, frosty as well. But lots of sunshine, and the sunshine continues into this afternoon, feeling warm, much like yesterday in any sunny spells. A bit cloudier later for parts of Wales, Western England up towards eastern parts of Scotland, turning that sunshine hazy, but staying dry over these parts. Whereas for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the Republic, a cloudy, breezy day, quite cool with patchy rain to the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Still to come for you this morning, we'll take you through the papers with Russell Myers from The Mirror and the founder of the Crown Chronicles, Victoria Howard. Time to have a look through the papers once again with The Mirror's royal editor, Russell Myers, and the founder of the Crown Chronicles, Victoria Howard. Morning, both. To the Mail on Sunday, Russell, looking at one or two, as they call, fascinating cameos we may not have spotted at the funeral yesterday.
Yes, indeed. Well, this is quite an interesting take on the funeral yesterday, because when you're faced with such an massive occasion of national importance and international attention, it's often quite difficult to spot the little instances which are very, very interesting. And they take a look at the flowers that were used, which were handpicked by the Queen, the soprano, who was absolutely incredible, who was drafted in because, of course, not only were the mourners limited to a number of 30, but of course the choir had to be limited as well. So there was only 4 singers in the choir that rang out throughout St George's Chapel. But the most interesting point was when the carriage that the Duke of Edinburgh used to ride around in Windsor Castle and district was actually used in the ceremony. And as a tribute, they placed his hat, his gloves and his whip in the carriage as it rode into Windsor Castle. And also the little box of sugar lumps that he used to feed the horses as well. So just a wonderful, wonderful tribute to a remarkable man.
Yes, because you won't have missed that if you were watching Sky News yesterday, with a wonderful, wonderful commentary for Alistair Bruce, who pointed out it was the sugar lump box. There's nothing he doesn't know, let me tell you. Sunday Express, Victoria, looking at William and Harry together.
Absolutely. I think many people were kind of anticipating that reunion of the brothers. Of course, they've not spoken face to face in over a year. So the Express kind of looks at it as Kate bringing them together. And this is more of an observation, but we saw the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and then the Duke of Sussex walking up back to the private apartments of Windsor. And it seems that Kate engages in some conversation with Harry, and then she leaves them and the brothers kind of talk alone. But it's so key, of course, the public way in which Harry and Meghan discussed ongoings within the royal family in that Oprah interview not all that long ago. And of course, such a sombre occasion being the first time they meet face to face. So many people on social media were talking about this, saying that, you know, this is really positive. And I do think that, as for many families across the world, a death in the family is kind of a chance to reflect and maybe patch things up if they've not been too good in recent time. In recent times. So I do think that we're hopefully seeing some progress there. And I think the wider royal family is also invested in that being repaired as well.
Well, let's hope so, because, I mean, forget the royal side of it. They're a family and they're brothers, and it's always better if brothers can get along. To the Sunday Mirror, Russell, looking at, I mean, and the picture which has framed all of this is that one of the Queen in the choir on her own, and the Sunday Mirror looking at how, at the end of the day, you know, she is a widow now.
Yes, of course. One of a number of striking images from yesterday, and it's also the main image on our front page today. The Queen cutting a very solitary figure on her own, not only because of the fact that you know, her beloved husband of 73 years has left her, but also because of this service was ravaged by the coronavirus restrictions. And this is a fantastic piece by one of our senior writers, Rachel Bletchley, entitled "Behind the Invisible Armour of Duty, the Monarch was simply a grieving widow." And certainly there have been many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world who've had to face similar circumstances. And certainly the Queen and the royal family were very keen to stand shoulder to shoulder with those people that have had to face this on their own. Certainly an extraordinary set of circumstances have led to this. And those images will live long in the memory, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, quite right. To the Sunday Telegraph, Victoria, I mean, what now for the Queen as a widow? How do we think it's going to change everyday life?
Well, of course, she's 95 this coming week, so I think we can definitely expect to see less of her, essentially. Of course, COVID still isn't over yet. But I think more than anything, we'll be seeing more of the younger royals, including Prince Charles, not so much on the young side, but just taking over more and more of those duties. Widowhood is something that obviously a lot of people are having to contend with in this last year because of the pandemic, and it's something that is a universal experience in grief. And one point in particular I saw on social media, which I thought was hugely poignant and interesting, was that this funeral actually gave the nation a chance to mourn and grieve together, not only for the Duke, but for those hundreds of thousands of people who have lost their lives in the pandemic, and for those people who weren't able to attend the funerals because of such restrictions. And I think that really resonated and will resonate with people across the UK.
I'm sure it will. As you said, very nearly 128,000 now, which is an awful lot of families affected. Look, can we finish off with Victoria looking at a bit of spelling, because it's the bane of a lot of people's lives, a bit of spelling, but are we going to have to focus more on it?
It seems that the rules might be shifting. So the Sunday Times report that there might be some new rules in the making to help simplify the English language. You see from the headline there, rules is spelt with 2 O's instead of ULES. And it's basically because English as a language takes up to 3 years longer to learn at primary school level than many other languages because of the irregularity of it. So they're hoping to move to this traditional spelling revised system, which will hopefully repair broken spelling. So we can expect to see, those silent letters and words like wrong and nash to be removed, and spelling hopefully simplified in terms of, as that example of rules there.
No,
that would affect...
no. No, Victoria, this can't be right. This cannot be right, surely.
So language, so me personally, I'm a German speaker as well, which is why I find this so interesting. For many other languages, they kind of have councils and systems in place to regulate languages. English doesn't really have that, and it's just kind of a bit of a hodgepodge over the centuries of things crawling in. So the American English, for example, that had a simplification, which is why they dropped the U from things like colour and favourite. So this is super interesting. I kind of see it almost like potentially the change we had, that shift that
I'm so disturbed, Victoria. I'm going to have to stop you both right there. It's been good to see you this morning. Thank you.